What's up, guys? Sir, wait a minute. Isn't there normally a nausea-inducing motion background behind me? Why is everything around here so gray and still and...
This is where I draw stuff. I hope you know you can't stay there.
Oh, crap. Telltale. I think I'm starting to realize that being on multiple channels at once is just kind of normal for YouTube. Prophet of Zod said it had something to do with quantum physics and cosmological used a portal. Bionic Dance used a spaceship. I just give up. I give up. I don't know how any of this works.
Well, drawing is easier when I'm not trying to work around any tiny hobbits. Now, why don't you tell me what you're doing here?
Okay. You know what? Fine. Since I'm here, I do have something that I want to talk to you about. This guy.
Steven Anderson. So not only are you on my drawing canvas, but you're telling me that you're also going to make me suffer through this quiverful stuff.
Yeah. Basically, if I'm going to suffer, you're going to suffer with me. So, I've been tackling Steven Anderson and his bunch of creationists for a while now, and they're all part of an organization called the Independent Fundamental Baptists, or the NIFB for short. The NIFB broke off of the IFB. That organization was originally headed by the First Baptist Church of Indiana. What we now know as the NIFB broke away due to several allegations of misconduct within the church, including sexual scandals, like, rape and hurting children, abuse, reports of extortion, and other honestly pretty heinous stuff. I'll link an article down below of one of those reports. That said, though, you have dealt with these guys on your channel before, right, Telltale? What have you made of Anderson and his bunch so far?
I've talked about Anderson before, yes. I did some debunked videos where he actually told his congregation to break the law, disregard signs or police who tell them not to proselytize in certain areas. Do it anyways, because God is your boss, not the secular authorities. That's one step down the wrong road as far as I'm concerned. But actually, he's part of the Quiverful movement, as it turns out. They're a pretty strange group. They think you should have as many kids as possible. They should be like arrows in your quiver, or some other nonsense. From what I understand, the Duggars are part of the Quiverful movement too. 19 kids and counting. Josh Duggar, Jim Bob Duggar, Michelle Duggar. I'm not gonna name all 63 of them. I'm just saying there are a lot. It's extremely patriarchal. The men are leaders of the household, and the women's job is to have as many kids as possible and manage the house under the leadership of the man. The disappointing bit about the whole thing is the fact that lots of people who ascribe to this philosophy can't afford to have kids in the first place, let alone 36 of them. Of course, Steven Anderson is rich. He's famous for being a hateful, bigoted, angry person. So he's got the money to support his 10 kids as he convinces his congregation members to have more and more. He also has a few sermons talking about soul winning. I mentioned this in the last video I did on him. It's a lot like how Jehovah's Witnesses do it, knocking on doors. But all of those have been instances of Anderson talking about different concepts from the pulpit. What's different about this one?
Well, instead of this being a video about the pulpit, this is actually Anderson going off on one of his newer congregation members about talking to other congregation members behind his back. I don't think Steven Anderson quite gets that when you're a public figure, people are allowed to talk about you behind your back. It's inevitable, and it's going to happen. The interesting part about this video, though, isn't necessarily that. It's the virulent way in which Anderson talks to a potential new member of the church, and the way he almost gaslights his congregation in regards to what they can and can't do. He's incredibly controlling, and I honestly think that his congregation qualifies as a cult under the Bite model.
Right here has texted people without coming to me. Look, if he had a problem with my doctrine, shouldn't he have come to me? Yeah. Or should he be going behind my back and backbiting, going to other church members who never asked his opinion, mind you, never even asked and said, hey, Chris, what do you think about Pastor Anderson's sermon? He just texts them because he saw them on YouTube defending me. So because they were on YouTube defending me, he takes it upon himself to rebuke them for defending the pastor of his church, calls my statements wicked and evil. And listen, I know your buddy Afshin Yaktin lets everybody get up and say whatever they want, but in this church, it's not a free-for-all, it's not an open mic. You don't come to this church and pretend to be a faithful member of the church while you're going behind the pastor's back. Did you ever have the guts to confront me with that, Chris?
So because somebody in the congregation thought the things he was saying in his church were wrong, he goes off on them and switches to defense mode. This has elements of behavior and thought control. He doesn't want people talking about his sermons, which are public, without consulting him first. He definitely doesn't want them talking to the congregation about their opinions on his sermons, because he wants everybody to have a unified mind. Organizations like this thrive on having an us versus them mentality, and by ensuring everybody's thinking is as unified as possible. It helps reinforce the cult persona, the mask. Also, I think the sermons he's talking about are the ones where he actively said that the government should execute homosexuals. Am I getting that right?
I'm fairly certain you're correct. I'll have my critique on the video where he actually says as much linked below. It's honestly some pretty disgusting rhetoric, and it's a video that, if you're squeamish, might make you a little bit uncomfortable. So please keep that in mind.
Because if you executed the homos like God recommends, you wouldn't have all this AIDS.
That's horrific. And it's the very definition of extremism. But let's continue. See what else he has to say.
Huh? Did you ever have the guts to confront me with that, Chris? No, you didn't. You didn't have the guts, you coward. You're like Judas. You want to go behind my back. I want you to get up and get out of this church right now.
Yeah.
Get out of here. Get out. What's that? Here's my biblical ground. You're a Judas Iscariot. Railer.
Yeah. The simulator.
Backbiter. I don't care if you're saved or not. You don't come to this church and backbite the pastor without even having the guts to confront him yourself and go around and say all this stuff, huh?
Notice how they're all perfectly okay with the behavior on display of their pastor. This is not something new for these people. This is not something that they haven't seen before. This is classic Steven Anderson, and for a lot of these people, I can only assume that this is why they're here. Behavior like this for Anderson is common.
That's not the only takeaway from those last few seconds. Notice how after smearing this guy in front of his congregation, he immediately decides to kick him out. And when he gets a chance to say his piece, he labels him as a Judas Iscariot type. Notice how there isn't a single person who gets up and tries to defend this dude. Everybody agrees with the pastor, ostensibly. Everybody agrees with the leader of their congregation. The worst part is there are visibly children in the congregation. There are kids being brought up thinking this is normal.
Why do you want to be here, Chris? If I'm tampering with the gospel, there are 40 other independent Baptist churches in this town that are King James only that don't, quote, tamper with the gospel. So why don't you go join one of them, Chris? Why are you even here? Oh, really? But the pastor makes wicked and evil statements and tampers with the gospel. That's not a great church, Chris. You're right. Disagreeing with what I preach is not a reason to be kicked out. You're right. Because listen to me. No one in this church agrees with me on everything. And that's okay. Because we're all different. We all read the Bible. We all have the Holy Spirit. No two Christians are going to agree on everything. That's fine. No problem. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I don't agree with this doctrine. I always tell them, that's okay. You don't have to agree with me. You're welcome to come here. But there's a big difference between not agreeing and calling the pastors preaching wicked and evil and accusing him of tampering with the gospel behind his back without ever bringing that to me. Do you see the difference, Chris?
So it's okay for people to disagree with you, but they can't talk to each other about it. It's okay for the congregation to think there's something wrong with your sermon, but the minute they decide they want to have a conversation about it, then it's not okay. No, that's not okay. Policing people like that is destructive influence. It's one step toward molding them into who you want them to be. It's changing their personality to be what the cult needs them to be, to survive, not their authentic selves. Not to mention the fact that biblical scholars are still completely settled on the actual meaning of some of the stuff in the Bible. So the dude who's dissenting from Steven Anderson's preaching does have a valid point, but it doesn't matter. Anderson has some special information that nobody else has. He has special access to God.
I should probably point out that pulling what the original authors meant from the scriptures is called exegesis, although, since Steven Anderson is a King James only preacher, then the entire idea of exegeting the original meaning that the original authors meant is completely lost on him. If the King James Version says something in late Middle English and he can twist it one way, then it doesn't matter what biblical scholars actually think the passage originally meant in Greek or Hebrew. All that matters is what he thinks about the Bible, and he's gone on record several times to say that he should let the Bible interpret itself. But if you're working with the King James only version, you're not letting the Bible interpret itself, you're working with an interpretation from the 1500s.
Get out of here, idiot. Pick him up and take him out if he won't leave.
You need to pray for him. This is not
Take him out. Hey, get out of here. I didn't ask you. You've never even been here, fool. Get out. Get out.
Did he just overtly call for his church members to take physical action against somebody? That's the wrong way to do it. Call the police, tell them that his invitation has been revoked and he's no longer welcome on the property. Do not, I repeat, do not call for your church members to take physical action against anybody, ever.
Get out. You don't just walk in here and start telling us how to run the church. We got a bunch of filthy out there protesting us right now. We're in a battle right now. Get out of here. You need to ask your advice. Pick him up and get him out of here if he won't leave.
We're in a battle right now? Wait a minute, isn't that something that the Jehovah's Witnesses talk about as well? How it's an us versus them issue because it's a spiritual battle? This rhetoric is sounding awfully familiar.
They do talk about that a lot, and they separate themselves from the world a lot, just like this. I use language about fighting pretty often, personally. I talk about fighting a battle and all that stuff, but my battle isn't against any people. It isn't against religious people. It isn't even against cult members. It's against extremism. It's against bad ideas. My battle is against hateful, toxic ideologies, and I want to bring as many people in to help against that fight as I can. We should be focusing on ideas, not focusing on who is or isn't a member of the church, who agrees with specific doctrines or not. And we definitely shouldn't be segregating ourselves from anybody. That's definitely the wrong thing to do.
Now look, if I will listen to people who actually are members of our church, who actually attend here, not a first-time visitor.
Of course you'll listen to your in-group, the out-group, or the other. No need to hear them out. They're wrong, always. You find authoritarianism in cults a lot. In fact, that's one of the signs they're influencing you in a destructive way. Authoritarian power structure instead of a system with checks and balances. Questioning authority is either heavily restricted or not permitted at all. And it's almost a universal rule that feedback from the out-group is misguided at best, and as a result should be ignored.
If somebody thinks that there's a reason why they should be allowed to stay, let me know. Because I see it as just pure evil to come to a church and sow these kind of lies about the pastor without even coming to the pastor one time.
But it's not a lie, Anderson. You do twist biblical scripture to fit your narrative. There is a reason I address how poorly you exegete Leviticus in the second video that I did on you. You push an exceptionally homophobic agenda, and this is why you're banned in multiple countries.
Yeah.
And even telling him that you have a problem, just going behind his back. I just can't think how a normal person would go to a church, and he already knew that I believed all that when he came to this church.
Right.
And look, if people are going to go behind the back and backbite and be a Judas and make railing accusations, this is what's going to happen.
Of course there are going to be repercussions for how you conduct yourself within the group. This group actually meets more than a few markers on the BITE model. Thoughts, feelings, and activities are reported to superiors, discouraging individualism and encouraging groupthink, compartmentalizing information into insider versus outsider doctrine, and many, many more. The guy invaded the church, came with an outsider doctrine, and was ostracized because of it. Any dissent is met with hostility. Now, I understand if he wants his people to have unified thinking. That's most definitely a sign of a cult, and I'm gonna call him out for it, but that's not my biggest issue here. My biggest issue with this whole thing is how he publicly shamed somebody like this. He's trying to teach a lesson to everybody around. If you have a dissenting opinion, keep your mouth shut or you'll get torn to shreds just like this guy was. It's how you use shame, fear, and guilt to manipulate somebody. There's also encouragement for spying on other members, and if he was sending these private texts to other members letting them know his thoughts and feelings about these sermons, then the fact that this was reported to the pastor tells me that they're spying on other members and they're also reporting their thoughts and feelings to superior.
I agree. It's definitely fishy business. But there's still a few minutes left of the video, and it seems like the bulk of the important stuff has already happened. I wonder what else there is.
And it's okay to disagree. And I don't want, and look, I already know that there's people that are going to go out of here and lie about me and say, oh yeah, anybody who disagrees with Pastor Anderson gets thrown out. Anybody who says that is a liar. That is not true. You do not get thrown out for disagreeing. You get thrown out for going behind people's back and trying to split the church and for rebuking people just for defending the pastor.
But it is technically true that people will get thrown out of your church for disagreeing with you. You just didn't like the way in which they disagreed, and explosive outbursts like this, because people are talking about you, a public figure, without first coming to you, is indicative to me of someone who's worried about that opinion. So in your position, it's best to try to make sure that everyone agrees with you on major things within your church so that you don't have to face that reality. If your opinions on the Bible are in fact truth, then they should be able to withstand scrutiny of any kind, especially amongst your own congregation, not strictly from the bottom up. You declare to your church that the only way that they can bring these disagreements with your message is not amongst themselves, but with their leader. That, to me, is a giant red flag. As we saw here, disagreeing with the pastor amongst yourselves will get you reported to the pastor and will cause repercussions. Also, if somebody in any organization that I was a part of said that we should get the government to mass genocide a percentage of the population, then I would immediately hold issue with that. And if somebody was trying to defend the person who made those heinous statements, then it would certainly behoove me to rebuke that individual who's defending such disgusting ideas.
And insulting all of us. He didn't just insult me. Anybody who supports me on the doctrine of the Sodomites. Okay, well, you know what? He insulted all of you. Because he said that everybody, he even used the word everybody, is just quoting Pastor Anderson and they're not quoting the Bible. That's what he said. I've seen the text message with my own eyes. He even admitted that he did it.
Okay, so he is talking about the sermon he held about LGBTQ people. I also absolutely love the fact that he's unironically using the term sodomites. But there are some interesting implications behind that. I mean, think about what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. They were all murdered. By naming people in the outgroup as sodomites, there's an underlying message that those people deserve to die. That is disgusting. Is it any wonder why the detractor in this church called his message wicked and evil? He's actively dehumanizing these people. And in this video, at least, there's a subtle implication that they deserve to die. Although from what you tell me, Suris, he does have sermons where he flat out says that.
And so, and if this makes you squeamish, then you know what? Go find another church. That's fine. This church is in a battle right now. If you want to go to a church that never has any fights or battles and where the police never show up, I'll help you find one.
There's more of that language about the church being in a battle. It's more of that us versus them mentality. And I think he just admitted that the police have shown up at his church more than once. This is the kind of narrative that Jehovah's Witnesses use sometimes when talking about how they're oppressed or persecuted, how everyone's going to be trying to murder them in the end time.
And I don't look, I'm for peace, but when I speak, they're for war. I'm not trying to pick fights. I didn't invite those people out there to scream the F word at me as I walked into church this morning.
Oh, so you're okay with that F word being censored, but you don't censor yourself when you use the other, much more insulting one? Excellent! I think the only reason that he's okay using the other F word in this situation is because that one specifically dehumanizes his outgroup, whereas this F word is one that he's not allowed to say because in his group, it's a nasty word.
And I didn't invite people to come here in their pajamas every Sunday morning and go around telling everybody what a bad preacher I am. Without even having the guts to one time in a year, come up to me and say, Pastor Anderson, you're preaching false doctrine. That would have been the right thing to do. Right. But that would come from a heart of sincerity. But an insincere heart just wants to go around and stab people back. And listen to me, let me tell you something. If people are texting you how bad I am, you should bring that to my attention and I'll do the same thing for you. It's not just because I'm the pastor. If somebody texts me how bad you are, the first thing I'm going to do is come to you and hey, did you know that you're being accused of X, Y, and Z? That's just ethics.
Right.
That's just common courtesy.
Under normal circumstances, that might be the most ethical thing to do. But there are circumstances in which texting people behind their backs is the most ethical thing you can do. Even necessary. What if you're in an abusive relationship? In many cases, abuse victims can't just solve their problems by talking to the abuser. They have to talk to other people for help. And in lots of cults, you can't solve a problem internally. Typically, the cult has some very specific agenda in mind, and they know how they want to go about achieving their goals. If you speak up about something you don't like, you're probably going to be cut loose like a dead branch. Also, I'm not a fan of the way he's framing his criticism. He's saying he's being criticized for false doctrine, but the one he's talking about involved innocent people being murdered. This isn't a doctrine issue. It's a decent human being issue.
I think it would behoove me to also point out that his underlings like Kent Hovind and Matt Powell have very similar rhetoric in regards to this exact issue, and they all agree on what should be done about LGBTQ people. Skylar Fiction was banned on YouTube for a short period of time because Matt Powell, one of Anderson's underlings, was talking about this doctrine about sodomites, as they so eloquently put it.
So look, if there's people that you know about who are going around and spreading lies or slander, or just, you know, that they think that the preaching is evil and wicked, somebody needs to come tell me that. And you know what? If somebody comes, and I'll make a covenant with you, if somebody comes to me and says that you're evil and wicked, I'll bring that to you. Because we shouldn't be backbiting anyone in the church, but least of all the pastor.
So we shouldn't be stabbing people in the backs. But if somebody stabbed somebody else in the congregation in the back, it's okay, as long as they're reporting it to the pastor. And you shouldn't stab the pastor in the back because he's obviously elevated amongst everyone else.
Okay? But we shouldn't be backbiting anybody in the church, and we shouldn't be falsely accusing anybody in the church. And if you don't like this church, you don't have to come here. And if you can go wherever you want. All right, let's go ahead and sing one more song. And I'm sorry, those that are new and those that are visiting, our church is not normally like this. All right, look, I promise you, stuff like this happens like once every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? Am I telling the truth?
Yeah.
Regulars? Okay. So you just happen to show up on that Sunday morning. All right, and honestly, this whole week has been like this.
Yeah.
We're getting persecuted on all sides, but you know what? I've not yet begun to fight.
Amen.
So this is a once every couple of years thing, but your entire week has been like this? This doesn't seem very consistent. Anyways, that's the end of the video. It's pretty scary considering the fact that there are actually children being raised in this. A lot of them.
Agreed. That's why I brought this to you. Cults are kind of your thing. I wanted to make sure that this guy is as exposed as he can be. The best way to filter out bad ideas is kind of with the light of day, or at least that's how I see it. Anyways, thanks for letting me take part on your channel, Telltale.
Of course. Now get the f*** off my canvas.
Oh, shoot. Right. Alright guys, if you're watching this on my channel, please go subscribe to Telltale if you haven't already. He makes awesome content, and he was one of the people I watched all the time before I started out on YouTube. I would highly recommend any of his videos documenting the history of cults like the Mormons, Heaven's Gate, and Jonestown.
Anyways, that's all I've got for you. You guys should check out Suris. He does stuff almost every day. He's also got a series deconstructing some of the propaganda that Anderson's organization puts out. He's had Bionic Dance, Aaron Ra, and a bunch of other YouTubers over there to collaborate on that series, so check him out. Also, check me out on Patreon and all social media. All links are in the description as always. Any last words?
Insert end of video tagline here.